CS120 Lab 6, Working with Formulas and Functions in Microsoft Excel. Starting with Pause and Practice Activity Excel 2-1, I already have the data file open that we're going to be using for this. So we'll go ahead and we'll start by entering some information into the worksheet. So we'll start with cell B10. And we're going to enter a formula in here. So all formulas, you have to start with the equal sign. So I'll place an equal in here. You should notice the equal appears in cell B10, and it'll also appear on the formula bar up here as well. So I could type it here, or I could type it in the cell itself. So I'm going to, instead of typing here, I'm going to choose a cell that I want to include as part of my formula. So I'm going to click on cell B5. You'll notice here the cell is selected and its cell reference is entered in our formula down here. We're going to add, so I will add a plus sign to this. And then we're going to click on cell B7 here. So you notice this is highlighted in a slightly different color, and it'll also show that different color down there. This is to help you understand exactly what you've added to the cell. So I'll go ahead and I'll press the enter key, and this should have $5,758, and that is our rental revenue. So I'm going to click now on cell B10, but I'm going to choose the fill handle, which is a small black dot in the bottom right hand corner of this, and I'm going to pull to the right. This will fill those cells for us. Now we do have this auto fill options button that is here that I could click on and change the way that these are filled across here, but I won't do that. So if I now look at this cell, I can see that it's B5 plus B7, and this one should say C5 plus C7 because our references here are relative. Thus, when I do a fill, it'll change that fill across this to indicate the changes to the references. Now if I click here, double click in this, you'll notice it will highlight the cells that we're now using for this formula. We'll next include a formula that uses a 3D reference. 3D refers to using data that is on more than one worksheet in your workbook. So we'll start here in cell B15, and we'll, as normal, type the equal sign. And then we're going to go to cell B11, which is our total revenue. We're going to do the multiplication here, so I'll do the multiplication symbol. And then I'm going to go to the rates and table sheets, and I am going to click on cell G2, which is our expense percentage. And then I'm going to press the F4 key. So the F4 key, what it's going to do is up here in our formula, it'll change this to a absolute reference where we're saying select the column as absolute and select the row as absolute. And the absolute is indicated by the $sign in front of the column and row of our formula. I'll go ahead and press the enter key to finish off our formula. Make sure I'm selected in here. And you'll notice it'll go back to the sheet that we started the formula on. We'll next fill this formula across to each of these cells. And I will let go. And what I want to do here is show you something. So if I click on this cell, you notice it says B11, which is a relative addressing. We also have the absolute addressing, which we did earlier. Now if I click on C15, you'll notice that the relative addressing changed the B column to the C column, but because we have this absolute, it kept the G instead of increasing it to an H like a relative address would do. We'll next create a 3D formula with mixed referencing. So we'll start in cell B16, our management expenses. Press the equal key, and then we'll click B11. That here is our total revenues. And we'll press this F4 key to make that an absolute reference. And then we will press it one more time, and this will make it a relative reference. So you'll notice here that it starts off making the column relative and the row absolute. What we want to do now is when we copy this across, it'll keep row 11 the same, and the columns will change. So now we'll put a multiplication sign, and we're going to go back to the rates table. Click on G3 this time. We're going to go ahead and make this an absolute reference. Then we'll make one more change to that. We'll make the column relative, and we'll do it one more time. And we'll make the row relative, but keep the column absolute. Go ahead and I'll press the Enter key. We'll next do a fill operation, which will show our mixed referencing in action. So I'll go ahead and I will select cell B16. I'm going to copy this down to this cell. I'll let this go. And one thing you'll notice here is if I click here, we're going to have cell B5 and B11 with the row being absolute. If I click here, the B stays and the 11 stays, because when we pulled down, this with a relative addressing would have changed to a 12, but we told it to stay at an 11. And this is so that we still had the revenue cell correctly selected. We'll now take B16 and 17 and pull across so that we can fill this information into each of the other cells. And you'll notice that the relative addressing will stick with this as well as the mixed addressing. We'll next use some formula auditing tools which will help you to fix errors in your sheet if you're having problems understanding how the formulas are working. So you don't necessarily have to click an individual cell all the time, and it can tell you where data is coming from. So we'll start off here. We'll click on cell E16, which is here. We'll go to the Formulas tab. We'll go over to the Formula Auditing group, and we're going to click on Trace Precedents. This means we're going to find out where the data is coming from. So we can see here that part of our formula comes from cell E11, and then part of it comes from another sheet. Now to get rid of this precedence, I just go to Remove Arrows. And now if we want to see all of the formulas at one time, I can click the Show Formulas button here. And this will show the formulas. So I can't see everything, so I would have to extend the columns a bit in order to see that. So I'm not going to do that. I'll go ahead and put this back. And I will click the Show Formulas button to get rid of that. We're next going to go ahead and edit some formulas, and we're going to correct. We're next going to be editing a formula and correcting an error we intentionally create. But I need to first here fix some issues that I created earlier. I had filled across the information a little too far. It doesn't need to be in the totals column. So I've selected that information and deleted it. I'm going to next select all these cells, H15 through H18, click Auto Sum. and it's going to create a sum formula across from left to right from B15 to G15. So I'll click here in cell H16, and I'm going to double click in here, and I'm going to change this formula from B15 to G16. I'll go ahead and I will press the error enter key. There should be a green triangle that appears there in the upper right corner, upper left corner of the cell. So I'm going to click back on cell H16. I'm going to click on the trace error button. This is going to be under the formulas. Actually, I'm mistaken here. Let me go back to the Home tab. And instead, I'll click in the cell, and off to the left here, this is the error or trace error button. So I'll click in the down arrow here. It says we have an inconsistent formula here. We know that the formula should be copied from the cell above, so we'll select that option here in the cell. Okay. We'll now go back to the Formulas tab, and we'll click the Trace Precedence again, and then this shows us the data is being properly selected from left to right and placed into our cell. Now go ahead and click the Remove Arrows so that we can turn off the arrows. Next, do a mathematical order of operations formula. The order of operations refers to a term called PEMDAS that you may have learned in school. Whenever you're doing math, you start by working with those items within a set of parentheses. You then do exponents. You'll then do multiplication, division, addition, subtraction in that order. So we're going to go ahead and cell B21, and we're going to enter a formula, an equals, parentheses, B11 minus B19, closing parentheses, division B11. So if we look at this formula, using PEMDAS, we'll do what's inside the parentheses first. So we'll do B11 minus B19. We'll then move outside the parentheses and divide this result by B11. See if I typed it in correctly. I sure did. I'll then press the Enter key. So we come out with our ending result. I'll then change cell B21 to a percentage. So I'll click on the percentage button here. And this will give us the actual profit margin in a percentage format. Alright, the last thing we'll do in this activity is we're going to name a cell. Named cells can make it much easier to work with formulas so that you can use the same set of area or range of cells, but just apply it with a simple name. Much easier to understand. So we'll go ahead and click on cell H11 here. And then we're going to go up to the name box, which is here to the left of the formula bar. So I'll click in there, and I'm going to type total revenue. And I'll press the Enter key. We'll then select B11 through G11. So B11 through G11. And I'll type up in the formula bar monthly underscore rev. Notice we had to put an underscore in there. You cannot put a space in a name. Okay, we'll go ahead and click cell A1. And we're going to go ahead and type total rev, excuse me, back up. Tried to put a space in there. Total revenue. Press the Enter key. And we should have moved to cell H11. Let's go ahead and do that again. Total revenue. Press Enter. Oh, I see what I did. I accidentally renamed this cell total revenue. So let's go ahead and go back to H11. And let's spin this out a little bit. I spelled it wrong. So in this case, I've spelled the name wrong. So I need to make a fix to that. So let's go ahead and I'll walk you through fixing it. So to fix this, we have to go to something known as the Name Manager. That's under the Formulas tab. So I'll click on Name Manager here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete both of these. Close this. Go back to the Home tab. So now I'll click on H11 again. And I'll be more careful when I type this in, revenue. Now I'll click on cell A1 and type total revenue, and now it's selected the cell that is that name. Okay, so if I've used B11 in any of my cells, that name will appear. Now I haven't here, but I just want to show this to you. So if I say equals cell H11 and press Enter, if I click on here, it should say total revenue, but it doesn't. What I actually wanted to do here instead was say equals total revenue and enter that, and it will use that as a name rather than the cell reference. The last thing we'll do here is we'll change some styles. Here we're going to go ahead and select B15 through B18, H18. We're going to click here on the comma style, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove the excess zeros by clicking on there it is, the decrease decimals. So this will take our dots out and the decimal places away. Okay, that ends this pause and practice activity. Moving on to pause and practice activity 2-2, we'll begin working with formulas. So we have the Paradise Lakes file that we used in the last pause and practice activity. So we're going to start with cell K14, and we're going to click on the Auto Sum button. Now this places the equals sum being the formula, with the parentheses to indicate the starting and ending values we'll be using with our formula, and the cursor is inside of that. So then we need to tell it what cells we want to use as part of our formula. So we're going to use cells B11 through G11. I'll enter that. You'll notice it put the word monthly revenue here. I'll then go ahead and I'll press the Enter key. So it will give us our total value here. I'll select cell K15 and I'll click the Auto Sum button again. And I am going to, instead of Auto Sum, I want to do an average. So I'll choose average here. And it did not do exactly what I wanted it to do, so I am going to click the Z key here, Control Z to undo, and this time I'll go ahead and do it the correct way. And then we're going to do cells B11 through G11 again. Now I could have just typed monthly underscore revenue in there instead of selecting. So I'll go ahead and press Enter. That'll give us the average revenue across those 6 months. Now, instead of doing our auto formulas here, I'm actually going to type the function. So I'll click, in this case, in cell K16, start with the equal sign. As always, you have to use an equals to start a formula. I'm going to type the word max. You'll notice that the word max comes up below to indicate there is a formula with this name. I'll then have to enter the beginning parentheses. I'm going to select B5 through G5. B5 through G5. I'll enter the closing parentheses, and I'll press the Enter key. This will give us our maximum value out of those 6 values that we chose. We're going to next determine the minimum TER revenue, so we'll go ahead and select cell K16. I'll do a fill down. Now, by filling this down, it will have changed the row because the values here in cell K16 are relative values in our formula. So when I pull this down, it will have changed that from a 5 to a 6, which happens to be the TERs. Click back in here and I'll change that from a max to a min. Press the Enter key, and it looks like I made a mistake. I forgot to put the I in min. So I'll go ahead and make that adjustment. We'll do another formula here. So I'm going to go ahead and select cell K18. And I'm going to type equals, and I'm just going to type part of the name. And it will give us a list of formulas that start with that. So I can go ahead and I can just select the first one in the list by double clicking on it. I'm then going to select cells B4 through G4. And it's going to count these cells, not the values within them. So, because there are no values in them. So I'll go ahead and I'll close up the parentheses. Press the Enter key. And it did not give me the right value here. So let me undo that. Now, the reason it didn't give me the right value is because I used slightly wrong formula. So let me go ahead and do this again. So I used the count formula. The count formula counts cells with numbers. We have to use what's called a count A, which counts those that have anything but numbers but aren't empty. So I will go ahead and choose count A, double click it, select the cells again, close the parentheses, and we should have the value 6 months. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select another cell here. We're going to use something called auto calculate. So we're going to select B11 and G11 here. Status bar is the bottom of the Excel sheet. It's over here to the right. And you'll notice that there's an average, a count, and a sum. Now if we want to add some of these, I can right click on here and I can choose some different values, in this case minimum, and it will add a minimum here. So this is just a quick and easy way to do some calculations without actually having to type in formulas. I'll do one more formula here. Now this is not a mathematical formula. This is a date and time formula instead. So I'll click on cell A25 here, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the Formulas tab, which is another way to enter formulas. I'll then click on the date and time option within our function library, and I'll choose today from the list. You notice it enters the formula equals today with an open and close parentheses. This is a cell that does not have, a formula which has no arguments, so we don't need to enter anything between the parentheses. So I'll just press enter, and it'll place today's date here. Now this will be today's date, as in the date that is your today. So if I were to close this and open it tomorrow, it would say February 7th, 2022. Okay, that ends this pause and practice activity. Moving on to our final pause and practice activity, 2-3, using the same worksheet as we used before. We're going to enter an if function. An if function is what's known as a logical function. It'll allow us to make decisions based upon information. So we'll start off in cell B22. So we'll come down here, and we're going to go to the function library under logical, and we'll choose the if function. So here it says, what is the test that we want to do? So we'll click in here, and then we'll select cell B11, and we're going to put the less than symbol on this. Okay, and we'll select K15. If we can move this around a little bit here. So K15, and then we'll make this a absolute value. And then we'll say, what are we going to do if this logical test is true? We'll type the word yes. And if it is not true, we'll type the word no. Okay, click OK. So here it says the revenue is below average for this particular month. Let's see. Now it asks us to do a centering operation on this, so we'll do that. And we're going to copy this across to the other cells. Looks like this probably was meant to be copied across, so I'm going to do it as well. Okay, next we're going to do a sum if calculation, and we're going to move to a different tab, the PLR Camp tab. So in here we're going to select cell A4, and we're going to determine how many days that we had females in our camp. So we'll go ahead and we'll click the formulas, click on math and trig functions, and we'll scroll down until we find the sum if function. So first thing we have to do is we want to know what is the range that we're selecting. So we'll go ahead and select the range as B4 through B38, and then we will press the criteria here, which is an F. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking through each of these cells. If we find an F, then we're going to sum the result that we find here in this range. So for instance, it's going to look here first and say, is this an F? Nope, it's not an F, so don't do anything. Is this an F? Yes, so add 12 to our value. Is this an F? Yes, so add 8 to our value. Now we have 20, etc. So I'll go ahead and I'll click the OK button here. So we say the number of days by females is 226. Okay. I realize they made a mistake. I should have chosen the number of days here instead of their age. So I'll just go back to this formula here, and I will change this to C, and then we come out with the correct value. Now to do the number of total days by male, I can go ahead and I can fill this down, but then I need to make some changes to this. So we're going to keep the what values are we looking for here. I'll change the F to an M, and it will keep the same values here, except we have moved down one row, so I'll need to change this to a 4, this to an 8, this to a 4, and this to an 8. And you'll notice now it will show the correct ranges. Press enter, and that is 76. And just as a way to sure we're right, I'm going to select both of these cells, look down here and see the sum is 193. Then I'll select all the days here, and it's the same sum, 193. So just a quick way to ensure to yourself that you're doing things correctly. We're next going to use a lookup function. One we'll be using is the VLOOKUP. So we're going to start off on the Merchandise tab here. And we'll select cell C4. And then we will be using some information on another sheet, our rates and table sheets. So we'll start off, I'll go up to our lookup and reference section, and I will look down until we find a VLOOKUP. So in the lookup value box, I am going to select A4, so we're going to look up this product ID. We'll click the table array. This is where we're wanting to see the information. So we'll go to the rate tables, and then I am going to select A2 through C12. So we're actually selecting an entire table of information. So what this function is going to do is it's going to look down this column, and then it's going to pick a particular value here based upon what our column index is. And one thing you will notice here, this is an alphabetical order where it says product ID. It has to be in alphabetical order or the function may not return the appropriate values. Okay, we're going to make this an absolute function, so I will use our F4 key to make that change. And then we'll do a column index number. We're going to do 3 because it's the third column that we're working with. We don't need to use the range lookup unless we want to. And the reason we know that is because these are bolded and this is not bold. So this is an optional that we can use if we want to. In this case we do. So we're going to want to put that. We'll go ahead and click the OK button. So what we should see here is if we go back to the rates table and find PL011, the cost, click on rates table, there we go. So if we find PLR11, the cost for that is $8.75, and that placed that value in our merchandise tab. It's a very useful function. One last thing we need to do here is copy our formula down. So I'll use the drag handle. Now you will notice I have an error here. So what I've done is if I look at this cell, you'll notice I'm looking up this product ID within this range. If I click the next cell, you'll notice that my range starting point isn't absolute, and it needs to be. So I need to make an adjustment to this. So I'll undo this. I'll change this to absolute. Let me undo what I just did there. Press the Enter key, and now I'll drag this down, and we'll have the appropriate values. Let's move on to the SUMPRODUCT function. SUMPRODUCT is a very interesting function. It's very similar to using matrices in math. In this particular case, we're going to be taking two matrices and we're going to be multiplying them together. So we'll go ahead here. We're going to put inventory value at cost. We'll go to our math and trig functions, and we'll find the SUMPRODUCT. So we're going to take an array, in this case a matrix, and we're going to take the cost here. We're then going to multiply it by another matrices, which happens to be this one. So we're going to take this value, multiply it by this value, then add this value multiplied by this value, etc. Let's make sure I get the right values there. I don't want that. I want just E. And then I'll click OK. So our inventory at our cost, So that would be our value that we paid for the product. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing for our inventory at retail. We can just do this with an actual typing this in. We can go to some product here. It'll start out the function for us. Down here below it says our next entry needs to be array 1. So I will select it. It's actually sales price. Then I have to put a comma in. Array 2, so I choose that there. And I don't have to put any other arrays, but I can if I wish to. So I'll close up this function and press enter. So lastly here, what we'll do is we'll apply a number format on here. As you notice, the cell D16 does not contain the full value if we were looking at this as currency. So I'll select both of those. Go to the home, and I'm going to choose from the drop down here the accounting. So this will add a $sign, and it'll round this to 2 decimal points for us. Next, we're going to be using a round function. So we'll go to cell C19. Let's go back to the formulas, math and trig. We scroll down the list until I find round. We're going to round this number here, C16, and we want to note to the number of digits. So we want this to no digits. Click OK. So you'll notice in this case it rounded it up as it's supposed to do. If we go ahead and do the other cell as well, here, I'm just going to do a copy down. It'll round this, in this case, down instead of up. We'll next work with some financial functions. So we're going to go to the Canoes Sheet tab, and we're going to do a formula in cell B7. So this will be the payment that we would have to make. So we'll go to the Formulas tab, and we'll click the Financials button here. And I'll choose the Payment option. So it's going to ask us some information here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click on cell B6, and then I'm going to go divided by 12. So this is for months. I'll go to the NPR cell. I'll click on cell B5 and multiply that by 12. We'll go to the PV cell. We'll go to cell B4 and the FV box. We're not going to enter any information. And the type box will enter 1. Now you will notice that down below here, if I click in these cells, it will tell you what these particular items are and give you some information on what you can use. So in this type, you can only use a 1 or a 0. Okay, I'll click the OK button. So it says the payment is 209 negative, which means money that we would have to pay for these particular items. Okay, we're going to go to cell C7 now, and we're going to type equals PM. To look for the payment function, press the tab key. So I'll just go ahead and type the same basic information in here we did before this, divided by 12. Do a comma. We'll pick this, multiplied by 12, comma. We'll then go ahead and click on C4, a comma. The FV is not used. We can just put a comma in. And then in the type, we'll put a 1. And we'll close this up, press enter, and it will give us the value for this cell. And we've reached the end of the pause and practice activities for this lab.